Hello there everyone. Today I want to show you how to make this Kumihimo bracelet with beads running through the middle, and this is what mine looks like. So I have my braids along the side and I've attached the two separate braids with beads here along the middle, and mine just looks like this. So you can use your clasp to fasten it, and then you have a nice bracelet like this. It gives a really nice impact. So if you want to learn how to make this bracelet, then stay tuned. So these are the materials that we're going to use. Now first of all, here I have my satin cord. This is a 1mm thickness, and I'm just working with this burgundy colour. I thought they would go nicely with the copper scheme as well and the beads. And then for the beads, I'm using some 4mm round metal spacer beads, just in this copper colour here. And then here I have some thread. Now this is just some nylon thread that's going to be fine enough to be able to get through a needle, because what we're going to do is use the thread to add in more beads once we've made our braids as well. Now I've got a needle here. This is just a beading needle, like I said, to be able to add more beads in. And then I've got my findings, so jump rings, my lotto claw clasp and extended chain. And then I'm using some ribbon ends here. These are 20mm ribbon ends I'm going to use to finish off the bracelet. And then also we'll need a round Kumihimo disc for this, because the braids that we're making are round, and it's in fact a 7-strand round braid, so we'll need that as well. So let's get it all together and let's get started. So then the lengths of cord that we'll need is, in total we need 7 lengths here of our satin cord of about 50 centimeters each. And then what I've just done is put them all together at the end and just tied a regular overhand knot just to keep them together, so we can start working with these on the disc as well. So I've then taken the knot at the end of my satin cord there and put it down through the centre of my disc, that hole in the middle, so it's coming out towards the back. And then this is how I want to set up all the lengths of cord around the disc. Now it might look a little bit confusing, but there is actually a method to this. I'm not worrying about the numbers in this case. What I'm doing is I'm first of all looking on the dots there just as a guideline, and then what I've done is put one cord on each side, on one side here, on each dot there, all the way around on the same side. So I'm just going towards the right, the next one is just going towards the right as well, so all the way around. And then the other 3 cords, so that makes the 4 cords, we have 3 left. Those 3 are put in between on 3 of the sections here, so we have equal slots in between there. It's just for easiness to try and keep it organised as we're working with it. I've left this one down here open because we need to have this open space to be able to work with and actually make the braid. So I've just basically got even amount of slots in between all the cords except for this open gap down here. And then to start making this 7-strand braid, it's a little bit different than your regular 8-strand Kumihimo braid, because we're not going across the disc and then turning the disc and then going across in pairs. What we're doing here is we're constantly working with this open gap, but this is going to keep moving around the disc. So right now I have it right down here on my right side on the bottom part of the disc. Then what I'm going to do is count kind of upwards or backwards. So if you kind of imagine you're going around the left side of the disc like that towards the left, then I'm going to go from the gap and count 1, 2, 3 on the cords here. So back to the 3rd cord behind the gap. What I'm then going to do is take that 3rd cord, release it, bring that and jump over the 2 that I counted into this open gap that we have, the big gap. Place this in the middle of that gap again, so we have equal slots on each side there. So as you can see, the disc now looks the same with how the cords are set up, but the gap has just moved. So what I'm going to do, instead of holding it here where the gap was down here, we constantly want the gap to be down on the right side. So I'm going to have to turn my disc so it sits like this, so we have the open gap again down on the right side. It's just so we can obviously reach, and for easiness to keep bringing our cords around. So we need to fill in this large gap, so I do the same thing. I count backwards, 1, 2, and the 3rd cord. I want to take that 3rd cord, release it, jump back over the 2 first ones I counted, and then place it in the middle of that open gap. And here again you got the dot, so you can just see, place it on the same side of the dot as you've done the other ones around the dots there. So this is basically the principle of the braid. You just want to keep doing this. So I turn my disc again to get the open gap, the big gap, down on my right side. So I count backwards, 1, 2, 3, and it's always the 3rd cord backwards from the open space down here that we need to release and bring down over the other 2 we counted and into the middle of that big gap. And you go again, turn your disc, and then take the third one, jump over and place it in the middle of the large gap. And that's basically all you keep doing. You want to build your braid like this, and once you find your rhythm, it does build up quite quickly actually. All you have to really make sure of is that you're constantly taking the right cord. That's the main thing really. So from the big gap, always reference that one, that makes it easier, and then count 3 cords backwards. So you just want to always make sure that you're taking that cord, then you should be fine. And eventually once you get comfortable with it, you can also go on autopilot really. And you don't necessarily then have to keep counting. But if you want to count while you're still kind of getting the hang of the braid, that's one way to help as well. So from the gap, 1, 2, 3 cords back. The third one I bring down in the gap over the previous ones, we'll count it. And then we turn the disc again to have the gap down on the right side. So you want to do this for a little bit till you have a few centimeters of braid really, because we need to use that at the end to finish it off before we then want to start adding in our beads to the braid as well. So I then continued for a bit now, making those few centimeters of braid. At the back here, as you can see it coming out, the braid is starting to form on the back, coming down through the hole in the center of the disc. So once we have that and you're comfortable with the length you've got left there, then what we need to do now is start adding in the beads. But what I want to just mention is, for your own personal reference, that's what I find, finish up where you have a big gap down here on the right side of your disc, just like the other times where we turn it around, but actually on the actual disc as well, so your disc is facing in the right direction. Just like the setup that I did when I started out, before I actually started making the braid. It's not crucial or anything, it just really helps for personal reference, because it's going to help with when to know when we're going to add in the beads as well. So end up with your big gap down here on the right side of your disc, so your actual disc is facing in the correct direction. So this is then how we want to add on the beads to all the lengths of cord. Now what I'm going to do is start down here and work my way around the disc. So down here on the bottom one, we have 4 beads on that, of those 4mm rounds, and then the next one over here, there's 5 beads. The next one that's out to the left side, there's 4, and then the one up here, there's 4 as well. The one right at the top, we got 5, and then the next one has got 4, and the one out to the right side has got 5 as well. So that's all the beads and all the lengths of cord. Now we're not using too many beads for the actual braids, because we just want the beads to be running down the very side of the braid here. And then we need to start incorporating the beads into the braid. So continue the braid the same way that I showed you before, but we just sometimes need to add in a bead as well. So this is the beginning point. So this is where I said, get to this point where you have the bottom right side with the open gap, the large open gap there, just for personal reference, because we're not adding in a bead every time we move a cord, we're only doing it sometimes. And I'm going to show you what's an easy way to kind of remember when to add it in. So this is basically like I'm starting a new round, you could say, because this is kind of like the beginning point. So what I want to do now is, just like before, this is the open gap, so I'm going to count 3 behind. So I need to take this cord and release it. But what I need to do now is I want to add in my first bead. So on this cord, I also release my very first bead, drop it down as I'm releasing the cord there. Make sure it drops all the way down in the middle, and the bead tucks in underneath the cords there in the middle as well. We don't want it popping up, because we need the bead to be sitting on the outside of the braid, so you have to make sure you just tuck it in underneath and it gets trapped. Then we bring the cord over the previous 2 cords and then fill in that large gap down here, and then we have the bead trapped in place. And then we just continue with the braid. So I turn my disc, so again I get the open gap, the large open gap, down on my right side. And now we want to do quite a few movements where we don't add in any beads. So we're going to count behind the 3rd cord behind the open gap, just release it, bring it down above the other ones to fill in that gap, not adding in a bead. Take the next one, turn your disc, and then take the next one, 3rd one behind the open gap. Again, no beads yet. Keep turning your cord, keep turning your disc here so you can get the right cords. Fill in the gap with the 3rd from behind. And you can see this open gap keeps kind of moving around the disc. And what we're aiming for now is to get back into the position where we then have the open gap in the same place, or down on the bottom side or the right side of the disc. So that's why I'm now working my way all the way around the disc until we reach that position again, because that is basically then where we need to add in the bead every time we reach that point. So I'm just continuing still with the normal braid without adding in any beads. Now, as you can see here, I've now run into this position where I have the large open gap down on the right side of the disc, and this is exactly where we now want to add in another bead, because this is kind of, you could say, the original positioning of all the cards. So we've just basically done one full go around where we added in one bead to begin with, and then gone all the way around the disc with all the cards, moving our cards without adding in any beads until we reach the same position here now. So kind of the starting position. So that means this open gap down on the right side of the disc, go 3 behind, the third card from behind. As I'm releasing that, I want to then also get one of the beads and release that as well. So just let it drop all the way down into the middle there and tuck it in underneath the cord that it's coming across, so it kind of slots in place. Because what you'll also be able to see, and place your cord there in the open gap, because what you'll be able to see then as well, that's another way to keep an eye on it, is this bead that you just added in now sits right above the first one we added in. So that's how we achieve that look, because they're going to then all be sitting kind of above each other, forming a line right on one side of the braid, and that's how we achieve that. So we keep going, this open gap now, and because we just added in the bead, we now want to do a whole go around, like I said before, without adding in any beads along the way. So just grab the third cord from behind the open gap, bring it across and fill in that open space, turn your disc, grab the third one, bring it across, keep turning the disc, working our way around. To do the full go around, like I said, where we get into the original position, where we then again need to add in a bead. So slowly getting there, constantly taking the third one from behind the open gap, cross over the 2 previous ones to then fill in that gap. Bring it across, turn your disc, and then you can now see here again, we have the big open gap down on the right side of our disc. So that means this one full go around, we're back in the original position. So that means the next one we bring in, which is then the top one right at the top of the disc, that is where we then need to, when we move the cord, also release one of the beads here. So just grab the very next bead you run into, let it drop all the way down to the middle, and then there, make sure if it doesn't fall in by itself, just tuck it underneath, so that the bead actually tucks underneath this cord that crosses over it, and that kind of catches that in place. So there we go, and then we just start again. We'll keep going all the way around, now again without adding in any beads. And like I said, even with adding in the beads here, once you get the hang of it and you kind of get comfortable with the braid, and also when you need to add in the bead, then you can really go quite quickly and almost go on autopilot with a lot of it. Obviously still keeping an eye that you're doing it correctly. But that's why I said that the best, I find anyway, place to start is by having this open gap down on the right side of the disc. It's just for personal reference. I find it makes it easier to then remember that this is now the point again where I need to add in my bead. Instead of, if your disc was pointing in another direction, it can make it a little bit more difficult to remember. So again, drop your bead all the way down, because then you know every time your disc is facing in the right direction here, then you need to add in the bead. You can also keep an eye on it and make sure to do it whenever the bead is going to sit on top of the previous one. That's another way as well. But you just obviously have to pay a bit more attention to that. So now we start another go around, do exactly the same thing. You'll be able to see here on the back, your braid is coming out and the beads are now starting to form on the braid as well. All running down the side right above each other, so we get a nice and even line with the beads there on the side of the braid. So just keep doing this until you run out of beads, and then we'll have to do another one as well. So we need to do 2 of these braids, but then I'll show you what the next step is. So now that I then kept going here, making my braid and adding in all the beads as well along the way, then it's going to look a little something like this. where you'll then find you have your main braid here with your cord, and then all the beads that we added, because of the way that we added them in, they all sit along the side of the braid, all in a straight line there. And that's exactly what we want. Now obviously you can make your section of beads as long and short or short as you want to. Completely depends how long you want your bracelet to be. You can just use more or less beads, it's completely up to you. And also what I've done right at the end here is I've made a little section of just the braid where I stopped adding in the beads. Basically just like I did in the beginning here before I started adding in the beads. Just to have a little section so we can finish off the bracelet nicely as well. So now that we're at this point, what we need to do is then take all this off the board and then tie a temporary knot. And then what we need to do is make another one of these as well. So we need to have two of them, which is then what I have here. So I've got my two braids and they're the same. And what you just want to make sure of is that you have the same amount of beads here on both of them. Because obviously they'll be sitting on each side of the bracelet. We're going to fill this in with more beads as well then. So now that we have these braids ready, that's then the point where we got to, where we need to start filling in between here. Basically also connect the two sides together. So to add in the beads, what I've then done is taken a length of my nylon thread here, so kind of like the sewing thread, and then I've just added a needle to one end, and I've also just tied a knot on the other end here, just a few knots there on top of each other just to make it enough so it's not going to pull through the braid. Because what we need to do now is use this to first of all attach it on one end. Start with one of our braids here, we need to attach it, but then we need to start using this to then add in all the rest of the beads that we need to add into the braid as well. So how long you need your thread to be is completely dependent on how you want your piece to be. So maybe about a wingspan or a meter or two. It kind of depends as well how comfortable you are to work with a long length. If you find working with a long length, you can just take as long as you kind of feel you need, because it also depends on first of all how long you want your braids, or how long you need your final bracelet to be, but also how many beads you want to add in, so how wide you want it to be, because you can obviously add however many rows or few rows that you want to. So just take as much as you're comfortable working with. And then I'm going to grab just one of my braids to begin with. And like I said, the first thing we need to do is just attach this thread onto one of the ends here. So I'm just going to start going through the braid with my needle, where the thread is attached to, just through the part where we haven't got any beads on yet, because we're just attaching it first, and then we're going to work our way up towards the beads. So just get your needle through your braid to attach the thread here, and then that knot there is going to stop it going all the way through. And then what I want to do is go back and forth through the braid a few times. Try and do it kind of close to, my thread is coming out there now. I want to obviously not go through the exact same place, but I want to do it close to it so there's not too much thread showing on the actual braid. Come out the other side again. So we're kind of just going through the braid here back and forth a few times. That also helps secure the thread in place, so it's not just the knot that it's depending on. Pull it all the way through. And also what I'm doing is I'm working my way upwards towards the first bead, as that's obviously where we want to start. Then using this thread to continue adding in more beads to it. So just keep going back and forth like this with your needle through your braid until you get all the way just below the very first bead up here that you run into. So now that I've reached that point there, you can see my thread is coming out just below the very first bead. So then what we want to do is start going through the beads here to then add in more. So I'm just going to take my needle and go through that very first bead, just straight through it, so we can get into position to be able to add in the first bead on the next row there. Just get tangled up a little bit there. Pull it all the way through. And then we're in this position, so what I'm going to do is pick up another bead, going to add that onto my needle, and then let it drop all the way down here, and that's going to then slot into that gap there is between the first and the second bead on the braid there. And I'm going to take my needle and go through that second bead, just straight through that as well. Try and, if you can, avoid the actual cord that's running through the beads there, because obviously they're attached to the braid. So you have that cord that's in the braid also running through the beads. Just try and avoid that if you can. It's not too big a deal. So there, I'm slotting in the very first bead, and then to fill in the next gap, we need to then obviously pick up another bead onto the needle, let it drop down, and then jump over to the next bead, filling in this next gap. So just go straight through it. So basically every time we go through one bead, we pick up a new one to then fill in the gap between the beads in the braid. And then you just want to keep doing this all the way down the braid. Then obviously you're going to start to see it building up. So keep going like this all the way to the other end. And then once we reach there, I'm going to then show you how we're going to add on to the next row. So I now reached all the way down to the other end here, and I filled it in, as you can see. And then what you might find is it might kind of curl up just a little bit while you're adding in these beads, but it will straighten out as we keep going. What you can also do is kind of just straighten out your braid a bit, or just pull it through to basically condition it a little bit. It's going to make the beads sit a lot better, like that. And then we've reached the end here, so what we need to do is come back down, add in another row, and all we do is we've finished. We added in the very last bead, that's this one that's sticking out. All the beads that are kind of sticking out are the ones we added in. The last one we went through is the last one in the braid. So now to change direction and come back down again, and I'm going to straight away take another bead, add onto my needle, let it drop down, and then I'm going to go straight back the opposite direction through the last bead that I actually added in. So the first one that's sticking out, so just put your needle through that one, just that one bead, and then pull all the way through. And I like to just, while I'm getting this row started, because the thread is still a bit loose, I like to hold my fingers on that last bead just to hold it in place while we're pulling this through until it sits in place. So it sits like that. So that bead that we just added in slots right in place, the first one in the next row. So now these beads we're adding in here are going to fill in the gaps between the ones we added in previously in the row that we just did, and these are going to be the ones that are then sticking out a bit. So pull that, take one more bead, put on your needle to then basically fill in the next gap, jumping from the bead we're coming out from over to the next one that's kind of sticking out from the row that we've done, and just go through that one bead alone. And again, I just like to hold my fingers on my piece here, also just so it doesn't, in case you're pulling and it kind of pulls a bit, so it doesn't fly out of your hands and maybe your beads will go all over the place. That'll be a bit annoying. Then pull it in so you see the bead then slots into that place there. And then you basically just want to keep going like this. Pick up one bead onto your needle and your thread, jump over to the next bead that's sticking out, and pull all the way through. And then it slots in place like that. And you can see it's now starting to build up, and you can properly see the effect now. So all you want to do is keep going with this as well, all the way down to the other end, till you then complete this row of beads. And this is basically how you do it. So you can really add however many rows you want to, like I said, to make it however wide you want to. So you just would keep doing this, go back to the other end, then make this turn just like I showed you up here to add in the next row. And you'll basically just keep doing that until you reach the width that you want. And then obviously what we'll have is the other braid that we then need to add in on the other side as well. But then what you want to do is keep going, add in however many rows you want to, until you reach the point where you want to add in the last row. That's going to be the one where the braid is attached. So keep doing that, and then I'll show you how we finish it off. So I've now kept adding all the rows that I want on my bracelet here, and what I've done is I've just added 3 rows in the middle, so not counting the ones on the braid. So in total that's with the braids, it's going to be 5. But like I said, you can do however many you want to make it as wide or narrow as possible as you want on your piece. So I'm at this point now, and where you want to make sure to do is end up so when you add in the other braid on the side, it's going to slot in just perfectly and finish the same place, right like that, as the other braid with the beads that is on the other side. So you just want to make sure that fits nice. So you don't want it to kind of be off a little bit. So you want the actual beads on the braids to sit right across from each other. So I'm at this point now where I'm going to start a new row, but that new row is going to be the actual braid here I'm going to add in. So I'm coming out from this last bead here, I'm going to pull it tight, and then just, again, I'm going to just keep hold of these beads with my fingers so they don't move too much. Then I'm going to go through the very first bead on the loose braid here. So the one that's going to be on the bottom. where we're coming from. Just go through that single bead, pull your thread all the way through, just like that. And then it's going to sit right here, and then what we need to do is go back to the previous row that we added, the last row that we added here. Because I've come around, I'm coming out from the bead in the middle here on the bottom ones, coming around through the first one in the braid, then I need to go back, and we're still going to have to use these beads that are sticking out from this whole piece so far. So these ones in the braid are basically like we're picking up a new bead and adding them in. So I'm still going to have to go through that one that's sticking out, the first one here, back through the opposite direction than we just came. And pull your thread all the way through, and then pull it tight. And now another thing is, while holding your fingers over it there is good to help the bead stay in place, because obviously this end is still a bit loose. What you can do if it gets a bit loose, just separate this out, pull the thread that's going downwards, coming out from the last row that you added, pull that tight, put your finger on it, your fingers there, and then pull the thread tight in the opposite direction here. And that's going to pull the whole thing, all the beads down here nice and tight. Until we get a bit further, then it'll hold itself in place, but just to begin with. And then I'm coming out from the middle there. I need to then, like, I'm picking up a new bead, which means I need to go through the next one that's in the braid. So go through that like this, just the single bead, the next one in the braid. Pull all your thread through. And then again pull it nice and tight. So it's going to slot in just like that. Then we need to go back to the row, the previous one that we added, so the beads are sticking out. So jump over to the next one, basically filling in that gap with the bead from the braid. And then go through that and pull your thread all the way through. And then the further you get, the tighter and easier it's going to be to work with as well, because then all this is going to then start holding itself in place. So basically what we're doing is sipping up the two pieces together. So we're starting down here and then gradually kind of sipping them up, you could say, and then attaching the two sides together with all these beads in the middle of it. And you just want to keep going like this. The beads in the braid act as the ones that you add in to the next row, all the way to the other end. And basically this is then the next row. It's going to also be the final one, obviously, because we're adding the braid in. Just keep sipping up the two sides of your braid until you reach all the way to the other end. And then your main piece is done with the two braids on the side, but then all the beads in between as well. So just keep going like this. So I now kept sipping it up here all the way to the top. So now both braids are attached to the beads in the middle. And then it looks a little something like this, mine does. Now what you might find is that when you're kind of putting all this together, you might find that your beads are kind of bunching up a little bit and it's not lying nice and flat. So in that case, if that happens, what you can do is just, once you've got it all attached together here and it feels nice and secure, just kind of run it through your fingers a bit, and that'll help settle everything in place so the beads and the braid settle them together, and just flatten it out nicely. And you're going to get a much nicer result, you can see. So you can just do that a bit and it'll make everything settle together here. So now we're at this point, everything is finished. So what I want to do now is use my leftover thread on my needle. I'm coming out from the very last bead there, attached everything together at the end as well. And basically all that's left to do with this now is finish off the thread. So it's basically the same as where we started out, just a bit in reverse. So I'm coming out from the last bead, so what I want to then do is start going through the braid to then be able to finish off the thread. So I'm just going to go through the braid right where my thread is coming out from the last bead there. So it's not going to be too obvious. That's also where it's handy to use a thread that's a similar colour to the actual cord that you're using in the braid. Makes it far less obvious and easier to hide. And then it's just a matter of going through the braid back and forth a few times, just like we did at the beginning, to basically fasten it in place. And again, I'm going to just work my way downwards towards the knot here at the end, just so when I'm going to then tie it off with a knot, that's going to end up being hidden inside the endings we're going to finish off the braid with. So keep going back and forth here. That's going to secure the thread more in place. And then when we get down to the bottom, you want to just finish the actual thread off by tying a few knots around the braid. So do that, get rid of your thread, and then you have your main piece of your bracelet done here. So now that you then get rid of your thread here, then basically all that's left to do is finish off the ends of the braid, and then we'll have a complete bracelet here. So what I'm going to be using for this is some ribbon ends that look like this. Now for what I've ended up with here, for my materials and the width that I made my bracelet, I'm going to be using these 20mm ribbon ends. It's going to fit just perfectly. So get both ends of our braid there inside just like that, and it's going to sit right here at the end. So I'm going to be using those, and I'm also going to be using some glue E6000, and I'm just going to be applying that with a toothpick here. So what I'm going to do is just put some glue around the ends of the braid, both ends there, let it dry for a bit, and then be able to cut off the excess, get rid of the knot there, without the braid untangling. So that's what I do first, and then I put some glue inside the ribbon end, and then before I add it, I prefer to always put glue in there because it makes it more secure. I'm then gonna put the ends of my braid inside there, and then I need to clamp it down. And I've already done a tutorial that shows how to finish off Kumihimo ends. So it is in that tutorial I show how to do this. The only difference is here, I've got two ends of round braid that I'm putting inside the ribbon end. Normally I'd be using these ribbon ends for a flat Kumihimo braid, but I'm just using these ribbon ends because I've also obviously got the two round braids, but because I've got the spacing, it makes it quite wide, so it fits just perfectly with this. So I've already got the tutorial. I'm going to put a link to that down in the description box below, but I just wanted to explain how I'm going to do it as well. So you want to finish both ends off here, obviously, get rid of all the excess cords, and then you use these little holes in the ribbon ends to then attach whatever findings and clasp that you want to add onto yours. So now that I attach my ribbon ends here on both ends, and I've also attached my clasp and extender chain, so it's ready to wear. And then this is what it looks like. And then you just use your clasp, obviously, to then be able to close your bracelet. And then it'll sit a little something like this. So you get this really nice effect where we're using Kumihimo braids on each side, but then connecting the two braids by using this beading technique. So that's how it looks. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial and found it useful, and I also think it would be fun to kind of play around with the patterning in the beads here when you add them in to the braid, and also adding the more beads to connect the two braids together. But otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed, and thank you very much for watching. Hello everyone. In today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this Kisses beaded Kumihimo bracelet, and it looks like this. So these are all your X's going all the way around, representing your kisses, making it very Valentine's if you want to use it for that. And then obviously the embellishment as well, and along the sides, and I chose to use red bicones to go with the Valentine's theme. You can also choose whatever materials that you want to use. So this is what it looks like, and it's got